Kirk Douglas. Say the name, and you immediately picture pure old-school Hollywood power. He was a titan of the silver screen, a guy with a jawline that looked like it was carved from granite and an intensity that could just about burn through. The camera lens. We remember him as the defiant gladiator in Spartacus, the tortured Vincent van Gogh, the cynical cop in Detective Story. He was a hero, a legend, a symbol of raw masculinity in the golden age of cinema. But what if the biggest dramas of his life weren't happening on screen? For decades, stories have been whispered around Hollywood, tales of explosive arguments, bitter rivalries, and powerful enemies who couldn't stand to be in the same room with him. Douglas was a man of stunning contradictions, a liberal hero who took a stand against the Hollywood blacklist, but also a demanding taskmaster who ruled his sets with an iron fist. He was a devoted family man in public, but a self-confessed serial adulterer in private. The very force of his personality created timeless movies, but it also fueled some of Hollywood's most legendary feuds. So, why did some of the biggest names in the business seem to clash so intensely with Kirk Douglas? The reasons are more complex, more personal, and more shocking than you might think. To really get the man, you have to go back to the beginning. Before he was Kirk Douglas, he was Isser Danielovich, the son of poor Jewish immigrants from what is now Belarus. In his autobiography, The Ragman's Son, he painted a bleak picture of his youth in Amsterdam, New York, a childhood of crippling poverty with an alcoholic and often distant father. He remembered his father as a ragman, someone who bought and sold scraps for pennies. This experience lit a fire in him, a relentless, all-consuming drive to escape, to prove himself, to claw his way to the top and never look back. This wasn't just a simple desire for success, it was a desperate need for reinvention. He changed his name to Kirk Douglas before joining the Navy in World War II, shedding the skin of Isser and stepping into the persona of the man who would one day conquer Hollywood. But that hunger, that rage against his past, never really left him. It was the engine that powered his performances and his ambition, but it was also the source of the fire that burned so many bridges. Douglas himself acknowledged his reputation for being difficult, attributing the aggression and fury to his tough upbringing. His friend and frequent co-star, Burt Lancaster, famously joked, "Kirk would be the first to admit he is a difficult person. I would be the second." This wasn't just a personality quirk, it was who he was. He was a fighter because he'd never known anything else, and in the gilded cage of Hollywood he found plenty of people to fight with. Perhaps no rivalry better captures the political divide of Cold War Hollywood than the one between Kirk Douglas and John Wayne. On the surface, they were two of the biggest male stars of their time, a pair of titans who both represented a kind of rugged American masculinity. But under the surface, they were polar opposites, two men whose fundamental beliefs about America, politics, and what a movie star should be were just destined to collide. John Wayne, the Duke, wasn't just an actor, he was a national symbol. A staunch conservative, he was a vocal supporter of the House Un-American Activities Committee, HUAC, and the Hollywood Blacklist, which aimed to purge the industry of anyone with suspected communist leanings. Wayne saw it as his patriotic duty to defend America from what he saw as a threat from within. For him, movie stars had a responsibility to embody strong, traditional American values. Kirk Douglas, the son of poor immigrants, saw the world very differently. He was a proud, liberal Democrat who was deeply suspicious of the kind of political persecution the blacklist represented, calling it a terrible, shameful time. This wasn't just a casual disagreement, it was a fundamental clash of world views. Wayne saw communists as a threat to freedom, while Douglas saw the blacklist itself as the real threat. This ideological war came to a head with Douglas's 1960 epic, Spartacus. The film was already politically charged, based on a novel by Howard Fast, an author who had been blacklisted. But Douglas took it a step further. He made the incredibly bold decision to hire Dalton Trumbo, one of the most famous members of the blacklisted Hollywood 10, to write the screenplay. And then, in an act of open defiance, Douglas decided to give Trumbo full public screen credit under his real name. In 1960, this was practically career suicide. Douglas himself admitted he was warned that using a blacklisted writer would mark him as a commie lover and end his career. John Wayne and his conservative allies were furious. They, along with right-wing groups, condemned the film's progressive message. Wayne saw Douglas's actions not just as a bad business move, but as a betrayal. He was outraged that a star of Douglas's magnitude would use his power to legitimize a figure like Trumbo. For Douglas, it was the proudest moment of his career. It was a huge gamble, but it paid off. When President-elect John F. Kennedy famously crossed a picket line to see the film, it effectively shattered the blacklist's power, but it forever cemented the frosty relationship between Douglas and Wayne. Their political differences even spilled onto the sets of the films they made together. But beyond the politics, Wayne also seemed to have a creative disdain for the kinds of roles Douglas chose. He was baffled by Douglas's decision to play the troubled artist Vincent van Gogh in Lust for Life. He reportedly asked Douglas why a big star would want to play such a weak and losing character. To Wayne, stars should be aspirational heroes. Douglas, on the other hand, saw acting as an art form, a way to explore the flaws and complexities of the human condition. Despite the deep-seated animosity, there was a strange, grudging professional respect between them. In a 1971 interview, Douglas skillfully dodged a question about Wayne's politics, saying, "We have never seen eye to eye on a lot of things, but he's the first guy on the set, the hardest worker I've ever worked with." It was an uneasy truce built on professionalism. It's also telling that Douglas, unlike almost everyone else, always called him John, never Duke, a subtle refusal to buy into the mythos Wayne had built. If the clash with John Wayne was a war of ideas, the rivalry with Tony Curtis was a bare-knuckle brawl of pure ego. It was a conflict born from jealousy, insecurity, and the raw ambition of two men who saw each other as direct competition. Their story is a classic Hollywood tale of a reigning king and a charismatic young challenger. When production began on The Vikings. In 1958, Kirk Douglas was at the absolute peak of his power. He wasn't just the star. He was the producer, the boss. He was known for his perfectionism and his need for control, traits many just called difficult. Into this world walked Tony Curtis, born Bernard Schwartz to a poor Jewish family just like Douglas. Curtis was handsome, charming, and his career was taking off like a rocket. He was the hot new thing. In The Vikings, Douglas played the grizzled, one-eyed Viking prince, while Curtis was cast as his handsome, defiant half-brother. The on-screen rivalry was nothing compared to the real-life tension between them. From day one, the set was a pressure cooker. Douglas, the established star, expected respect. Curtis, brimming with confidence, refused to be intimidated. Their arguments became legendary, reportedly causing frequent production delays. Sources from the time suggest Douglas saw Curtis not just as a professional rival for screen time, but as a social threat, someone whose natural charm could outshine his own gruff intensity. The production became a chess match, with both men constantly maneuvering for the upper hand. Their animosity carried right over into their next and final collaboration, the epic Spartacus. This time, Douglas's power was even more absolute. As executive producer, he had total control. The power imbalance was huge, and Douglas didn't hesitate to use it. Curtis later gave a remarkably candid assessment of his co-star, describing Douglas as difficult and neurotic. But he immediately followed it with, "And that's not a negative. He's an excellent picture maker. Boy, he sure knows how to get his picture made." It's a fascinating quote. Curtis recognized and even respected that Douglas's difficult nature came from an obsessive drive to make the best film possible, no matter whose feelings he hurt. The iconic climax of Spartacus, where the captured slaves stand up one by one and declare, "I'm Spartacus," is a perfect metaphor. On screen, it was a moment of profound solidarity. Behind the scenes, the production was marked by power struggles and clashing egos. After Spartacus, the two men never worked together again. The on-screen battle was over, and it seemed Douglas had ensured he wouldn't have to share the spotlight with his charismatic rival ever again. Years later, after Curtis's death, Douglas released a surprisingly warm statement, saying they shared a warm friendship, and that they were two Jewish kids from poverty-level families who could not believe our luck. It suggests that beneath the rivalry, there was a shared understanding of their parallel journeys. Perhaps in the end, they were just too much alike. Kirk Douglas's reputation for being difficult wasn't just reserved for other actors. He was known for clashing with his directors, and he wasn't afraid to impose his will on anyone, even a budding genius like Stanley Kubrick. Their collaboration produced two masterpieces, Paths of Glory and Spartacus. But it was also a conflict that would define both of their careers. It was a battle between a star who demanded control and a director who would vow never to give it up again. Their relationship began with the 1957 anti-war film Paths of Glory. Douglas, acting as producer, hired the relatively unknown Kubrick to direct. The result was a masterpiece, but the tension between the star producer and his director was already simmering. This tension absolutely exploded on the set of Spartacus. Douglas had originally hired another director, but fired him after just 1 week. In a bind, he called the 30-year-old Kubrick, offering him the job. It was an opportunity Kubrick couldn't refuse, but it put him in a position where Douglas was the ultimate authority. For a meticulous director like Kubrick, it was an impossible situation. The disputes started almost immediately. Kubrick and screenwriter Dalton Trumbo fought over the script, but Kubrick's biggest battles were with Douglas. In his autobiography, Douglas recounted one of their most explosive arguments over a script rewrite. Douglas's reaction was volcanic. "I hit the ceiling. I called him every four-letter word I could think of," he wrote. He recalled screaming, "I got the money based on that original script, not this shit." According to Douglas, he threw the script across the room, and Kubrick simply agreed to go back to the original. Another infamous clash came over the powerful crucifixion sequence. Douglas, the actor, was proud of his work, but when he saw Kubrick's initial cut, he was horrified to find the director had removed all of his close-ups. Douglas flew into what he described as a towering rage. In his own telling of the story, he grabbed a chair and threatened Kubrick if he didn't restore the shots. And, of course, the close-ups are in the final film. The feuds were relentless. Douglas saw Kubrick as a talented guy, but also, in his own words, a bastard. For Kubrick, the experience was a lesson he never forgot. Though Spartacus was a huge success that established him as a major director, he largely disowned the film. It was the only film in his legendary career where he didn't have complete artistic control, and he vowed it would be the last. The experience of working under Kirk Douglas was so profoundly negative that it fundamentally changed how he worked for the rest of his life. The war over Spartacus perfectly illustrates the paradox of Kirk Douglas. His stubbornness and aggression made him difficult, but those same qualities got the film made. Kirk Douglas's combative nature was only one part of his complicated legacy. His life was also shadowed by persistent rumors and serious allegations that cloud his heroic public image. His reputation as a notorious womanizer was something he openly admitted to, but some stories went far beyond simple affairs. For decades, one of the darkest, unsubstantiated rumors in Hollywood has linked Douglas to the alleged assault of actress Natalie Wood when she was a teenager. The story has never been officially confirmed, and Douglas never publicly addressed it, But in the wake of his death and the Me Too movement, the allegation resurfaced, leading many to re-examine his legacy through a much darker lens. His name was also connected to the mysterious 1949 disappearance of actress Jean Spangler. A note found in Spangler's purse mentioned an appointment with a Kirk, but no definitive link to Douglas was ever established, and the case remains unsolved. These unproven allegations, combined with his famously aggressive personality, paint a picture of a man who often lived by his own rules. He was a product of a system that frequently enabled the bad behavior of its biggest stars. He was a man of immense talent, courage, and great generosity, donating millions to charity. Yet he also left behind a trail of bruised egos and lingering unanswered questions. His legacy is one of profound contradiction. Kirk Douglas was, without a doubt, a force of nature. Forged in poverty and driven by a relentless ambition, he carved out a place for himself in the pantheon of Hollywood legends. His intensity was his greatest asset, fueling iconic performances that have stood the test of time. But that same intensity was the source of the fierce rivalries that defined so many of his professional relationships. The animosity with John Wayne was ideological, a battle for the political soul of a nation. With Tony Curtis, it was a primal, personal rivalry between two ambitious men who were too similar to coexist peacefully. With Stanley Kubrick, it was a war over creative control that produced a masterpiece but ended a partnership. He was, by almost all accounts, a difficult man. Demanding, controlling, and often abrasive. Yet, it was that very difficulty that enabled him to achieve greatness. He fought with his directors and co-stars because he had an uncompromising vision. He fought the political establishment because he believed the blacklist was a moral outrage. His life was a testament to the complex nature of greatness. He was a hero who was disliked, a principled man with deep personal flaws, and a creator whose methods were often destructive. The story of Kirk Douglas isn't a simple tale of good versus evil. It's the story of a man who contained multitudes, leaving behind a legacy as complex and as fiery as the man himself. What do you think? Was Kirk Douglas a difficult genius whose ends justified the means? Or was he a tyrant who let his ego get the best of him? Let us know your thoughts in the comments below. And if you enjoyed this deep dive, don't forget to like this video and subscribe for more hidden histories from the golden age of cinema.